Up more west than,
Like Phoenix,
right, yeah.
the new stadium.
Okay.
My uncle lives in Phoenix, and he actually had to look at the
Let's get
contract for
started.
that stadium.
Um,
So he had to move.
the Title 21 committee meeting, and why don't we start with Bill? Introduce ourselves.
Bill Evans, Assembly.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Dick Training Assembly.
Tim Potter Dell.
Jennifer Johnston, Assembly.
Amy Dombowski, Assembly.
Jerry Weaver, Community Development.
Erica McConnell, Planning Department.
Tom Davis, Planning.
Michael Ivensey, architect from Widener.
Harold Moniz, Collins Warman, working with Widener. Kieran Hines with Widener. And Greg Sabano with Widener Permanents.
Okay, so why don't you folks take it over?
Okay. As we said, we already did introductions, but I wanted to at least tell a little bit about the folks that we have here on our behalf. As you see, Tim's here and Michelle are both here from Dow. They're partners with us and have helped us both at Country Lane, our project here in Midtown, and also City View 2, which, by the way, I must say thank you very much to the staff for their assistance. We had a successful rezone application that was finally went through last night. We anticipate if a appeal has not already been submitted, that it will be within the next 20 days, but we're prepared to deal with that. And then once it goes to the Assembly, we're prepared to deal with the eventual appeal of that as well if we're successful, which I think we're going to be. But my point is, thank you very much for Tom and Dave and certainly Erica for being there last night and speaking out on behalf of that rezone application. Kieran to my left is our land acquisition manager for Widener. He does a lot of work with our performance and our financial analysis, so I thought it'd be good for him to be here to be able to answer any questions about some of the economics of deals that we see here in Alaska. Harold is also, as he said, a partner of ours. He's working on this project and others with us down in the lower 48. He's a senior planner with Collins Warman and has been very valuable to us in our process. And Michael, as he said, is our chief architect for Widener. In addition, we employed local architects to help us navigate the process here in Anchorage, and Deanna and Tara have been great to work with from Spark, and so we asked them to come here as well to speak about some of the specifics in Title 21. We're going to give you an overview. We have a presentation for you, an overview of Widener's perspective in terms of development, some of the challenges that we see from a 30,000 foot view, some of the differences that we see in other places and municipalities that we work in down in the lower 48, and be able to answer questions as to where we're at and what we're doing.
And I have one question. Will this also be available digitally to each of us?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep,
and
we'll
then
do that.
and it might be, as we go through, we might want to see if it's something we want to put online or not.
Okay.
And I just want to say, I'm keeping notes on my iPhone. I'm not sending emails or texts. I don't want you to
We
think
don't have to
that.
confiscate
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So let me be brief, and then I'll turn it over to Harold, and then we can do questions afterwards. We also asked Tim and the folks in Dow and Spark to give some specific meat issues about Title 21 itself. We're grateful to be invited here. Quite frankly, we haven't always felt that our significant investment in multifamily here in Anchorage has been valued or understood, and so we appreciate the opportunity to kind of explain that a little bit more and answer the questions for you. For the benefit of those that are sitting here that don't know, Widener's been in business now for 38 years, 34 of which we've been here in Anchorage. We currently own, depending upon what number you look at, in the vicinity of 5,000 units, and it's tough to tell how many of those are here in Alaska because of the significant project that we have going on over at our Four Seasons Mobile Home Park, where we're taking 363 units, and we're completely gutting all of them and replacing every single one of them. It's a multi-year project. We'll probably be there for another 2 years. We're doing about 60 to 90 new units there every year. So at the end of all that, and if we don't have any other development, we'll be right about 5,200 units, I think, or 5,100 units, something like that. So we've been here for a long time. We have a vested interest, and it's about 10%. Our holdings in Alaska are about 10% of our company's total holdings. And so we do development, some development, mostly it's acquisitions, but our development has really kicked off over the course of the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years of our development. The last development that we did here was at Park Plaza 2, which is 100 units over at 14th and C.
C.
A.
A.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in that area. So And we had issues developing there, and as it's well documented, that's part of the reason, and Tom has been very good about explaining to us that some of our experiences there has really spurred some of the differences in Title 21's parking regulations, because as we know, the costs there are very, very expensive, and to build, particularly build here, parking underground. And so we'll talk about that in terms of the economics as we move forward. So the point is this: we're glad to be here, to be able to talk with you, to give you our perspective and answer questions for you. So with that, I'll turn over to Harold, and he can start.
And just before, right now, what is your current occupancy?
Well, all rolled up.
I mean, average.
We're essentially full. I mean, we're 95 and a half on a full roll-up, which means that we have about 4.5%, and it's generally understood that if you're have 5% vacancy, that you're full. Now, it's a little bit different than what we saw a year and a half, 2 years ago when we were at 2%. But we attribute that to three things, and we'll get that into that later. But one of those is, the military. There's some challenge with respect to our military. So when you look at our larger vacancy, it's up kind of towards J-Bear. So that's a concern. We think that the municipal election today, and people are kind of worried about what's happening and what's going to go on in the direction of their city, and then the price of oil. Those three things have conspired to really have some unsettling nature in the marketplace. But by and large, we're still relatively full.
Did I miss something? You said you have 5,000 units overall? In
As a
Anchorage?
company? No, I said once we have a full number of mobile homes that will be replaced there, we'll have that.
What I was trying to discern is the number of units in Anchorage. And you said 10% of your holdings is in Anchorage?
Yeah, we have 41,174 units throughout the United States.
We have 4,662 units currently in Anchorage.
Right.
Harold?
Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here. I would not consider myself an expert in Title 21 at all. You guys have your own reasons for getting where you are, and I'm really respectful of the time and the energy that it's taken staff to do that. Part of my background, I've spent 20 years in the public sector. The last position I had was a planning director for a small resort town right next to Sun Valley, Idaho, called Ketchum. And so politics all around these areas are somewhat fun to navigate at times. So I'm here to heavily lean on the experience of some other folks here that have direct experience with Title 21. But as I've gotten into the private sector, my understanding of how things work in the planning realm has taken on quite a bit different light, and I hope to share some of that with you. So. So this is meant as a dialogue and a discussion. I'm certainly not here to lecture. And again, if I'm wrong on some things, then I'm certainly willing to be called to the carpet on it. But I think for the most part, what developers want is predictability. They want certainty as they go into crunch numbers, run performance, see whether it's even economically viable to do something. They got to really have a pretty good understanding of what's to be expected of them. And developers, for the most part, want to do the right thing. They just need to know what that is. They're definitely willing to work in the community and fulfill the needs and the expectations that the city has set out. They want flexibility. They want to be able to let the market kind of solve problems and create the situations where, some people may want storage, some people may not. Diversity in choices, I think, is always good, because some people don't need things other people do. They will make choices economically, the market will respond. And they want efficiency, decision-making at the lowest levels. I don't think you'll ever get away from public outreach. So I'd say, having none is probably not realistic. But there's a balance in terms of how many meetings, what kind of processes you go through, and who drives what in terms of how you set the rules. And then again, this is a partnership. Developers are here to fulfill the goals of the city in some aspects, and there needs to be a working relationship between both the city and the development community. So as I took a look in talking with some other folks about, difficulties of getting projects built here, there's a lot of other factors than just Title 21. You're talking about skilled workforce, the competition between other higher paying opportunities they have, short construction season, and then if you have to extend it, tenting, heating, all those things drive up construction costs. Just the sheer cost and supply and getting building materials. I haven't actually looked at other zoning codes and seen how long it is, but just looking at yours when I downloaded it was like, wow, that's a lot.
Well, you should have gone through it page by page, word by word.
They probably couldn't afford that. And then I think the other thing that kind of struck us was the property owner initiated rezones. Typically the cities set a land use plan and then they rezone the land. And here to accomplish the objectives of that land use plan, and the couple of projects I've been involved with, it's kind of the property owners out there leading the effort in rezoning the property, and that's sometimes appropriate and sometimes it's not.
It's on projects that I've worked at in the last 40 years. The first question typically a developer asks is, what's the zoning? And if the zoning isn't right, then where do I find another piece of property that's zoned correctly for what we want to do? When we ask that for Anchorage, it's all zoned R3. There's a limited amount of the R4 high-density multifamily housing where you can efficiently build projects. It's just not there. So you're always doing a rezone. What happens with a rezone is it increases the cost. I think in the City View 2 project, we've got $50,000 into that project just for the rezone. That all gets added on to the cost per unit. For 36 units, that's over $1,000 a unit right there, just to get the property to the right zoning. Of which in most cases, we wouldn't even consider doing the project unless it was zoned the R4. If it's not zoned R4, we'll go somewhere else. There's nowhere else in Anchorage to go. Because there isn't. I think Carol's got some figures on the amount that is zoned R4. There's just very little that's zoned R4.
And into context, let me just add, in regards to City View 2, and I'm sharing this with you, and I've shared this with Jerry, so it's not going to come as a surprise. We were disappointed, frankly, that it was put on the developer to be the burden and the onus to go out and search for that reason. We're put in the position of being the bad guy. I mean, and we recognize already we're from the lower 48. I mean, despite the fact that we've been here for over 3 decades, we're from out of town. And so here we are in front of a hostile South Addition Community Council, and they have some legitimate issues and some legitimate concerns, but by and large, it was difficult. And we went in front of them 4 times, including the replat. And the 3 times that we went in front of them for the rezone, we were voted down, and pretty strongly voted down, despite our best efforts, despite the fact that we listened to what their issues were, revised the project, and have taken some steps to mitigate some of their concerns. We were still put in the position of being the bad guy, especially when the idea from staff, the idea from the municipality is always to rezone that whole area. That's what we've read in the 2020 comp plan. That's what we've read in the McDowell report. That's what we've heard from staff, is that whole area, there's a desire to have that change, but we were put on the front line of paying for it, to go in front of the community councils on numerous occasions. And you know what? I don't have a problem with the community council personally. I don't have a problem with people being involved civically. I think it's a good thing. What I've seen, however, is that it was firsthand was that there was not a lot of understanding of what our perspective was, nor was there a lot of understanding about the code. And so the vote was really about whether they wanted development next to them, not about whether they want to develop within Anchorage, but whether they want a development next to them. And those are two separate questions. And again, my point is, in jumping in here, is that because of a property owner initiated rezone, we were put in the position of having to do something that the muni wants anyway.
And with the new land use map, what is,
Well, with the land use map, we recognized, not to get into particular cases, there are areas that we're proposing.
but this area,
Excuse me?
was this area changed in the new?
The area that came
Yeah.
up last night, obviously it was because we recommended favorably on the development.
Okay, just,
And typically in a project, you go before a community council one time. And I think most developers I've worked for, if they had to go more than once, they say, I'm gonna find a different site. I'm gonna build somewhere else. In Anchorage, it means I'm gonna build in the lower 48, I'm not gonna build in Anchorage. Because there isn't any, there's no other game in town, there isn't an outlying community.
I just wanted to add one thing that Jennifer brought up, and while, yes, I think the land use plan map that will be coming forward at some point will identify this for higher density, that doesn't mean that the city's going to be doing an area-wide rezone to put that map into full use in practice. It will still be kind of the status quo of the petitioner will have to come in, or the applicant, and go through the process for that specific piece of property.
I would just, what I'm trying to do is find out where we can mitigate and where we should mitigate.
And we felt, clearly, early on, staff has supported this. They supported the desire. They helped us shape kind of what rezone we were going to pursue. That having been said, we had to pursue the rezone, and instead of, as Tim illustrates, having it already zoned in a way that would make it easy for us to not, have to have this delay. We're 2 years in, over 2 years into our conversation about Country Lane, and we're about a year or so into our conversation about City View. We want to develop, but we haven't. There's no plans at this point. There's no concrete plans to put a shovel in the dirt because it's taken us so long just to get to this point. So
I first looked at this project 3 years ago and did a preliminary site plan on it. And we said, oh, okay, we can get that many units on it. And we'll wait for Title 21 because we can't do anything until we get more relief on parking that Title 21 was going to bring. So we waited and we waited. We got to that point, but then we're in the process of getting the rezone based on the Title 21. And so, 3 years that's sitting here. As a city, you have missed a window of opportunity for development to the point where oil prices were high, everything was going. There needed to be units here up in Alaska, and now the whole environment's somewhat changed in that 3 years because of waiting on that process of what Harold was talking about, of not knowing for sure what we're gonna have, what we're gonna build, what are the rules. That's all we were waiting for is, well, what are the rules that we're gonna build on?
Let me just ask you, have you processed rezonings in other jurisdictions?
I'm working primarily here in Anchorage. We have done those in other areas. I think Michael will probably be the best person to talk to.
I have done it, but it's only on rezones are major. If you're gonna do a rezone, it's usually.
Well, we're no different than any other community.
But it's a major, so most people shy away from it. There has to be a big benefit if you're gonna take that major task, and typically what it is it's on a large scale piece of property that's 100 acres, something bigger than that, where the profits of what you can get out of that can somewhat pay off. It's not on every single piece of property that
And can we go back
exists.
to the first slide, the very first slide? Because the staff is not an advocate for your project. Staff is an advocate for the community and compliance with the comprehensive plan and the code. We totally supported what you processed last night. We support your other 4 projects as well, but we are not an advocate.
I guess that's
You know,
part of the problem, in
it's
my
what they
opinion.
want.
If I can jump in real quick, I'd like to respond to Jerry. In order to implement the comprehensive plan, it is ridiculous to think that every property owner that has to come in to rezone the property is responsible to implement the public's plan that was adopted
You
by
know
the
as well
assembly.
as I do, the complicity of complications of the rezoning. Some property owners may not agree with what's there. And we have no control over people signing the application to process those rezonings. So we.
This
we
community
talked
did
about-
area-wide rezones all through the seventies and
We,
eighties.
we talked about doing an area-wide rezone. When we update the plan map, we're gonna have quite a few changes proposed there. That's one of the concepts that we've talked about doing.
And-
So that addresses part of your question.
Yeah.
Historically, for the past 4 decades, other than the area-wide zonings that took place in the seventies, the city never processed large-scale rezonings.
But let me-
What you're telling me is that the zoning is all set back for 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's
And-
out of date.
and so
It's
that-
out of
that's-
date. There's no question about it, it's out of
So,
date.
and I want to just address one thing, and then we'll let Harold move on. So the problem is, we don't pursue a ton of rezones because we find the property in the area that we want to build, and it's already designed for us, for developers to come in and build the kind of projects that are needed. And let me point out one other thing, and I have to underscore this. This is a small project for us, and for anybody who's going to develop, that's going to spend the money to do that. 36 units is very small. Our average footprint on our projects are 108 units.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
Greg, I
but
think-
hold on, if I can, the costs that we incur here that go directly to the bottom line are only spread over 36 units. It's not like we're doing a 300, not like
Okay.
Country Lane where you can spread it out over 300.
Amy,
So-
Amy?
Thank you. My goal today, we have a very limited time.
Okay.
So my goal today is to hear from you what it is your perception is and to articulate to us what you think a potential path forward is.
Okay.
So, though this is helpful commentary around the table, I think we need to stay focused.
So if I could, Harold is going to do our wider perspective, and we'll ask to make sure that we take advantage of the time that we have. And then we'll go over to the guts of the Title 21 issues, which we've asked the folks who are actually doing this, which is Dow and Spark, to be able to be succinct and brief with their comments. So.
Keep going.
So I think the way I look at it here, because I was involved in some of the preliminary planning on Country Lane, and looking at the economics, you're talking about building prices that are, we estimated between 30 and 40% higher than the lower 48. So, your competition in terms of the development community coming up here is basically the rest of the US and Canada, where they do these things better, or these things aren't as much of a factor. And I think your challenge is to create the environment here that the free market will take on those extra costs and build up here. So I did a quick analysis on the R4 zone, because basically you don't have any R4A properties except for Country Lane. The base FAR for both these zones is lower than the maximum FAR for the R3 zone. You have almost 500 acres in the R4 zone. Almost 400 are already developed, so you have about 100 acres vacant. Of those 100 acres, you have 4 parcels greater than 3 acres in size that total up 80 acres. You have 3 parcels between 1 and 3 acres of 4.5 acres, so that leaves 90 parcels that are less than 1 acre, which comes out to an average lot size of 7,800, which is not very conducive to higher density projects. I thought I'd bore you with words, so I threw in a graphic here. This is a project in Redmond. You may not like the size, that may be out of scale here, but this is what's happening around the Seattle area at least. 220 units for 138 dwelling units per acre, almost a 4.0 FAR. Certainly they had base FARs, they had incentives, they took advantage of them. Notice the building height. It's 70 feet, and that's, I'm gonna get into that next, because that's an International Building Code driven number. It's economics, again, that's driving building height. They had allowable height up to 125. They aren't gonna make that investment, because it's a different building type, a different construction cost. So quickly, the wood frame, it's the most economical for mid-rise and your higher density projects. Wood frame buildings, when you can get up to 5 stories, you can get 50 to 80, 90 units per acre. So it's a really economical way. It's kind of the International Building Code actually says you get 3 stories at 50 feet, but then you can, if you fully sprinkler it, you get 4 floors and 70 feet. Washington, and you can put that over 1 level of concrete as a podium. Washington State actually adopted an amendment that says you get 5 floors if you pressurize the egress stairs. So now you're at 5 floors of wood frame construction. Seattle went and topped them 1 more and said, we're gonna allow you to build 2 stories of concrete. So now you get 7 levels of 5 levels of wood frame and 2 levels of concrete. And that's a very, that's product is utilized a lot in Seattle.
So then you're above your 70 feet at that point.
You could be, you're limited to 70 feet. You may have to make compromises in the heights of the first 2 floors, but if some of it's parking, then you can do that. If you're retail and having it wrapped, there's ways to do that. Again, this is a different project, 255 units, 176 dwelling units per acre. This is a 5-story over 1 concrete. Again, building height 70 feet, even though they're allowed to go 125. And that's typical in most communities, I think, is you see a gap going up to 70 feet in height, and then there's a gap between that and 150 to 200 feet, because it's really just not economical to build in there. Your concrete construction is type 1, it's the most expensive. You got to get up 15 to 20 floors to make that economical. So there's this interesting gap in building heights. And again, so this is the concrete construction, $250 per square foot. That's a Seattle number. Again, that would be 30 to 40% higher here, is our estimate. You can go unlimited in terms of height and floors.
Go back to, I didn't quite finish reading that.
Yeah, I think when we took a look at Country Lane, I think one of the problems with the incentive system is one of the biggest incentives is for underground parking, or I think you're contemplating a code change to wrap parking would allow that. A lot of the properties have water table problems or soil problems, so you're gonna have to build up, you can't go down. Some of the smaller properties that you already have zoned R4 are too small, or just underground parking doesn't work there. Even structured parking above, you're limited in terms of efficiencies.
What happens is, but by the time you get the ramps in and you get up to the different floors, you run out of space on the lots because the lots are too small. And so for the size of lots that you have available to build on, the underground parking or the wrapped parking is close to impossible because you can't make it work. And City View 2 is a real good example of that. We looked at that, well, because the water table was lower up in that area, and we've got some bad soil. It's been nice to dig it out and go down on that. But the problem is that we go down a story, build another PT slab, and those garage parking spaces are now about $30,000 a space, and we only picked up an extra 10 spaces by going down the floor, because most of the site was eaten up with ramp getting down there. And so it just didn't make any sense to go down there for 10 more spaces. And if those are the types of lots that you've got zoned for R4 right now, nobody's ever gonna build the wrap or the underground parking. So that first incentive, the most strong incentive that you have, is kind of not applicable to the Anchorage area.
What would have made it, what incentive would have made that project palatable? Additional height?
No, we didn't have problems with height. We didn't, basically, if it was zoned right, we would have built this 3 years ago.
Zone, right in what respect?
If it was
Zoned R4.
R4 rather than R3. If it was what we're. which
To
we're
confirm, he's
basically-
talking about City View.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
City View.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean, I just wanted to.
I mean, but on Country Lane, I really get back to Country Lane to see what wasn't right there. We rezoned it to R4A. You had the height, you had the mixed use. What made that not have a return on investment?
Are we gonna be
It's-
seeing later on in the?
We're gonna.
Let's wait.
We're gonna
because
talk a
we're
little bit
gonna
more.
get
Karen will talk about that,
Yeah.
we'll get into that.
So,
Move on.
well,
Go ahead.
I think, go back, you know, a lot of the incentives you have built in the code are things that developers are already gonna do. You can't really build these kind of projects without amenities. That's the expectation of people, and they'll make different choices if you don't provide. I think in Wooden Creek Village in Woodinville, which was a project I worked on, there's 900 units, you know, they're committing to lots of outdoors open space, they're committing to dog parks on top of the roofs, cause that's convenient for people, and there's a lot of things that they're already gonna do, so I don't really know in terms of incentive system.
Yeah. We had those arguments all the time.
And again, I think when you look at modulation, you look at step backs, you're talking about increasing the building costs, cause the structural loading, how buildings actually work, it keeps adding on, and so it just makes it tougher. When you look at parking, that's a lot at what drives density, and as a planner, it was like, oh, really? You know, it's the car. So, you know, under building structured parking is 35 to 40,000 a space. If you can separate a structured parking scenario outside of the building, so you have a structured parking in your building separate, you can get that cost down to about 22,000. Again, these are Seattle prices. And a surface parking lot is 5,000. So, you know, those are all decisions that go into how, what makes a project feasible.
And you can figure if you've got a 1-to-1 parking ratio, that's $35,000 each unit that gets added on versus 5,000, so it's a $30,000 delta to do that type of parking. You can only do that in areas where you're gonna get a real high return from the rental costs, which Karen can talk more about how that transfers into rental cost.
Dive into Country Lane.
Sure, I think it's this, this idea of, well, specific to Country Lane you asked about it, it's this idea of competition in an environment where costs are such that we're looking at, you know, we're looking back to Park Plaza 2, and if it cost us, you know, $225,000 per unit, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago to construct this, and you know, what have costs done since? What are we able to build in some of our other markets at similar costs, but where things are more certain, where we know what those rent levels are. And I think that idea of, you know, competition for development dollars really comes into play. You know, the added issue here, you know, when we started down the road with Country Lane, the rezone, we achieved it. I think it did take some time, but you know, in that time, economic conditions became uncertain, and certainly some of our markets in the lower 48, we've elected to push some of that money elsewhere and start projects or continue projects there that, you know, here we kind of felt like, gosh, things were going so well, and do we pull the trigger on an investment that's, you know, for Country Lane, 200+ units, a $50 million project in light of some of the difficulties that we're working through with City View 2. And so it is that, those factors that go into it. In addition, we've got 56 or 54 income generating units that are there currently. And so that's a difficult decision to make when you pull those units off the market and, you're looking at a lengthy construction window and when did those dollars come back? And it's not until you have a stabilized project and that's generating revenue.
And to simply answer your question, it's cost. I mean, it's cost, and despite the incentives that are currently available, they don't mitigate cost. And if you're talking about cost of $250 to $275 a door to build and construct, why would we do that? I'm not done. I don't mean to be rude. I just want to get the point across here. Why would we do that when we can go and we can buy projects elsewhere, we can construct projects elsewhere? If you're wondering why development's not happening, it's because it's inherently difficult. We get that, and we're committed to it. We have 30 acres of land that we want to develop at some point. The problem is the length of time that it takes only adds to the cost, and the cost is already high. So we have to find a way to mitigate that. That's really what it comes down to,
You
Jerry.
have choices, Greg, and that's why we really value the partnership, because I really had high hopes that we could bring all 4 of your projects on board within a 10-year period.
Mm-hmm.
We changed the code for you. We tweaked it around.
You didn't change it for us. You changed it for everybody who's going to develop.
We changed it for everybody,
Right.
but you're the prime driver. We also are doing, and you probably aren't aware of it yet, the mayor's office has tax abatement legislation at the state level that they have shared with Juneau already, I'm not sure, to help further, because we know you have choices on which part of the United States you want to build, and we want to make sure that our codes are complementary to meeting our housing needs here, because you can build the density, you have the team to build the density. We just need to make sure it fits into our community.
And for the committee,
Yeah.
I mean, Jerry's, everything you said is correct. They've worked with us, they've engaged us. Our point is, it's taking a long time.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's a number of factors. I'm not here to point fingers as to why that happened, but I'll give you just one quick example. In 2014, we're not a seller of buildings, you know that. We own our buildings and we own them for a long time. We've probably sold in the last 20 years, prior to 2014, we sold less than 10 buildings. We sold 5 last year, and we 1031'd out of them. There were 4 buildings in Texas, I think 6, right? 4 buildings in Texas, 1 in Arizona, and 1 in Washington. Proceeds of that were about $140 million. We traded into $435 million worth of new product to add to our portfolio, and we didn't do it in Alaska. And my point is, we want to develop here. There's not really much that you can buy here anyway, so that's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. But the idea that there's money that we can and should be able to employ in Alaska, the only way we can do that is if costs are contained and certainty is achieved, as Harold talks about. And we're going to continue to work this process. Dick, we're going to continue to work this process over at Country Lane. We are.
Yeah, the Country Lane, it's not dead. I mean, it's delayed, and it's those 2 things, cost and time. And that's where you guys come in, is the time thing on the process. Getting through the process of doing this takes time, going through all the additional meetings, the public meetings. Every time we get one of those hurdles to go through, it's like, it's just 3 months. You think that then there's a hiccup somewhere. Then it's 5 months. 5 months in Alaska is a year. It doesn't, because you've lost the buildings.
And 6 months could be 2 years. That's
Yes,
the truth of the
and
matter.
so all of a sudden, all of the process of what you've got to go through to get that, and the Title 21 seems to increase that process.
Could you be specific on the R4A, where you think it increases the time?
I
Because you
can't
have-
be specific because I have not delved into it
Okay.
myself
And
personally, but other
generalities-
people on the
We will.
team could.
Yeah. like I said, our goal is the overarching, so we'll take
Right.
just a few more minutes to do that, and then we'll turn it over to the
Yeah.
specific code stuff, if
Okay.
that's okay?
Yeah, that's,
And I think I'll defer to Sparks on this in terms of some of the difficulties they had.
We can dive into the specific code issues that we've seen are challenges in regards to the FAR and the daylight claim issues that we've worked really closely with Tom and Erica and Jerry. And we appreciate their willingness to work with us and meet with us and work through these challenges. And we understand that some of those changes have actually been proposed and are in draft form at this point. We were told- sorry, I have to switch to it.
And I guess while that's being pulled up, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there was a lot of discussion while Title 21 was being modified, that there needed to be adequate testing and vetting of the changes that were being put forward and what the requirements were, and what the incentives would include, and how they actually acted on real projects. And quite frankly, it has been Cook Inlet Housing and Widener who have been spending the money to go through the drill, to do the testing and vetting that I believe the government was responsible for. And, I mean, it's been a great learning experience. Erica and our team in total have spent a lot of time with Jerry as we figure out, what does this mean? And how do you interpret this piece? And I think Eric would agree. It's not as straightforward necessarily as a lot of us thought it would have been. So we've discovered items along the way, and we'll point some of
okay,
those out.
so, you ready to continue?
Yeah. Okay, so in starting the project, the first question that's always asked is how many units can we fit on a site, and how do we do that in a manner that's going to respect the neighborhood that we're going into? Our first step is to go to the code and look at what we can do, and under an RO, we're allowed to build with an FAR of a 2.0 with a 50% lot coverage. So from a real quick overview basis, there's a 21,000 square foot lot. We can build up to about 42,000 square feet, and with that force, the 50% lot coverage, a 4-story structure to achieve the 42,000 square feet. As a broad overview is how to maximize the site. Now, how do we get to the FAR of 2 is the question. Under the code as it's currently written, the FAR is at a baseline of 1.0, and then there's the bonus incentives that can get us up to an FAR of 2. So an additional FAR of 1. The bonus for open space, so just quickly walk through what the bonus incentives are and what we saw as opportunities to increase the square footage and buildable area of the building. Bonus for open space. On this one, in order to get the parking, we decided that really the ground level or basement or below grade parking would be necessary with the residential structure above that. With that in mind, we assumed that our open space would be in the form of a rooftop garden aspect and with patios accessed from each of the units. So that one seems to be something that's achievable depending on the high quality space, which I think is a great addition to the bonus provision. You can take advantage of additional square footage. The square footages that we're able to capture, this number here reflects non-high quality space, and that really relates back to the daylight claim, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and how the building's offset and how we achieve a 25-foot dimension, which is required for high quality space. Below grade parking, as Michael kind of talked about a little bit earlier, we did explore looking at below grade parking, but the logistics of the site size and constraints and the ramping requirements really did not, for the additional cost, get us to a point where we said, okay, this is worth exploring and looking at. Now, the bonus points associated with this provision would have obviously been a great addition to the project, and it allowed us to get to the FAR a lot quicker. Since then, we've had some conversations about the wrapped parking, which I think would be a great addition to the FAR bonus provisions.
But not on small infill lots like this.
Yeah, you have to have enough room
Yeah.
on the lot
Yeah.
to build the
Yeah.
parking garage and then wrap it.
Right.
And I might add, I mean, the special limitation that was put on this particular project anyway wouldn't have allowed us to go over
Correct.
35 feet, so you,
Yeah.
the disconnect there is that it's allowed, but then we're limited, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Potentially
Right.
allowed. Yeah.
Just scroll down, yeah, that's another page. It's not showing up on our screen.
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Affordable rental housing, Widener, that's not their specialty, they do market rate housing. So this one was right out of the chute, something that we didn't look at pursuing. Bonus for enhanced sidewalks and walkway widening. We feel that this one seems to be fairly in line, especially with the recent changes that have been put forth with the increase to 2 square feet of additional area. I think it makes a great environment for pedestrians and creating interaction on the streets. We're taking advantage of an additional 3,000 square feet of buildable area through this provision, and that is being achieved by creating a 12-foot wide sidewalk along 14th Avenue. So there'll be some sidewalk area, some landscaped area, lighting, bollards, things to really enhance the environment. Bonus for upper level setbacks. This one was not so advantageous for our project in particular, and I'm not quite sure, without exploring it on other projects, how well it will fit into other project types and what kind of advantage can be taken from it. But under this one, by creating upper levels that step back from the building face, you're reducing your impact, your daylight shadowing on other adjacent properties. I think it's a good design thing, but the amount of credit that you get for that, I feel like that might be a little low. Right now it's set at 1/3 of the area of your setback.
I might add to that, it also really increases the cost because you no longer have your structure stacking. So you've now got the structure that doesn't work through the building, and so you tend to want to shy away from it.
So we do have setbacks on the building. We felt that was the right thing to do given the neighborhood. How can we take up a little bit more dense environment and step that down to the neighbors surrounding? But we're not taking advantage of this point because we don't meet it per the line of the code per se. Item number 6, daylight for residents. As the code is currently written, the definition has a very strict daylight plane, and in talking with Tom and reviewing this one, it sounds like this was really not the intent of that, and so there's been proposed language to change that, and with those modifications, we are able to utilize that, so that really helps us in achieving the 36 units as desired. The last bonus point is for pedestrian interactive use, and this one really deals with the retail component. We are limited to only a residential use on this site, and therefore this one was not used in this specific project. Quickly to summarize here, under the way that the code is currently written, we can get up with the bonus provisions that we've talked about to about 24,000 square feet, which is definitely lower than would fit the needs of Widener's request. And at that point, it's, do we pursue a rezone, or do we build 17 units at 24,000 square feet and call it good? That's definitely not even close to an FAR of 2, which is allowed by code. So in working with Tom and Erica and Jerry, looking at these and the proposed changes that have been put forth, we have been able to take advantage of about 38,000 square feet. So we're closer to that FAR of 2.0, but we're definitely not there. We're still about 4,000 square feet of maxing that out. You know, there is also the fine line of balance of what's appropriate for the neighborhood and those types of things. Tim, do you have anything to add to the?
I think the exercise in the FAR is to ask yourself where it started, you know, and where did that number come from? And, you know, one of the beauties of having Harold here and that we've talked about is that, you know, what is generally typical in other communities? And we have crunched the FAR for these higher density uses to the point where, at least in the experience of City View 2, that the FAR that you're supposed to be able to get to with bonuses is unachievable. And that's because you're starting way too low. So that there needs to be an uptick in the base level to be able to even come close to fully utilizing the benefits of any incentives. And it seems silly to have a code that starts at such a low deal that it's killing development at the start, doesn't let you get to where you need to get to go anyway, and that's going to be a pure disincentive for projects going forward. So we basically, our reviews are that it's creating
Amy?
a situation where there's not going to be development.
Thanks. So Tim, in other communities, where does the FAR usually start, or what is a common reasonable starting point?
That's a pretty tough question.
I'm not a
sure I
planner,
have
you can tell.
Um,
Or a filter.
You know, different communities have different, some don't even have FAR provisions. In Ketchum where I worked, we did a form-based code, and that talks more about the form of the building versus attaching a number to it. They eventually did put an FAR number just because they wanted to incentivize affordable housing. So I think it's all across the board. Again, I would go back to that one slide, you gotta do it better than anybody else.
And for your information, FAR is gonna come up throughout Title 21. I mean, it's not just residential.
Oh, yeah.
It's
I've seen it.
The purpose of the low FAR is to basically cut back on the bulk of the building. And when I read the lowness of your FAR and read through the code, it appears as if you have a problem with people building too big and too bulky of buildings up here. And then when I go out and drive, there's a disconnect there. Because these aren't big bulky buildings that are built here. So it feels like you're trying to protect against something that you don't have a problem with. It could be something where you take it up and maybe at some point you start to get some projects that are coming in and say, oh, this is a little too high. Maybe you need to take it back down. It's something you need to adjust and fine tune that fits your community, not some other community. Because as Harold was saying, those ones in Redmond, they were up around almost 4 for their FAR, but I think they start out at 1, correct? They start out 1, but they just have more incentives, and it's easier to get up to that 4. You know, they make it real easy to get up to the 4.
So with that said, because I've always had concern where you set it low and then you have this incentive when I feel the market already builds that in. But you're saying that in Redmond, the incentives then work. I mean, that it's a program that, I mean, I'm kind of confused. To me, I'm not sure if incentives is a way to go.
If you want lots of building to go on, incentive it down at the base.
Yeah.
Give it, say, okay, we've got to eat, we're not worried about bulk. We want bigger buildings and what we've got we want to change.
Certainly the market conditions in Bellevue and Redmond make those incentives work.
Yeah.
You know, high demand in workforce.
Right.
People, high tech, make a lot of money. They,
Right.
you know.
So you can build to the market, and the market is a sophisticated market,
Right.
and their wants and needs really includes all the incentives.
I think there's a sensitivity to this market, obviously,
Yeah.
and I think the planning department has understands that, and they've already moved to increase that. And, you know, internally, our discussion is 1.5 the right place to start at, because that's,
Yeah.
You're
that's the
absolutely- you're
conversation.
absolutely right. You know, I think they just need to be recalibrated a bit. They were probably a bit too conservative,
Mhm.
and we're recalibrating.
Yeah.
But it's still, the whole end game is to make sure it fits in with the community
Mhm.
adjacent.
I would add that it is startling to see, you know, some of our projects here locally, some of our properties, you know, the rent differential between those Redmond deals that were underwritten, you know, somewhere in the ballpark of rents of $2 a square foot. That differential between some of the, you know, our higher end properties here is not as wide as you would necessarily
Yeah.
expect. And the operating expenses also aren't dramatically different from Seattle area properties. So it really is this cost and, you know, the differential.
I just have a general question on your on your last project in Bellevue. What were the rents in those typical types of projects for, say, are they comparable to here? 10% less, 20% less?
You know, to be honest, comparable. I mean, our project in Kirkland, when we started construction on that deal 3 years ago, I think we were underwriting rents that were about $2 a square foot. We can point to rents at that in you know, if not a little bit higher here at
But you still
Park
have a
Plaza too.
38%
It's-
issue to overcome
it's-
of land development costs, the land costs, the labor costs, the material costs. So
And
that's
time.
really what we're struggling with. We can fix all these code issues. It's that 38% issue that gets in front of us every
It's,
time.
yeah, it's those costs and it's time. You
But-
know,
but
how
I-
long it takes or
Yeah.
how difficult.
Part
it
of that
is.
38% is our problem though with code, right? I mean, that's not, I mean, there's always a joke in Alaska that everything is transportation. And it is, but, I mean, I've seen in my 40 years that cost come down through a larger market. So we're also making it more difficult with code.
Mhm. I would agree.
The next item that we wanted to touch on is the daylight plane.
Mhm.
And this really relates to how are we impacting our neighbors? Are we building too large of a structure? How do we balance that against the FAR and what we can build to make the whole economics work and be feasible? This is an example that we did in exploring the daylight plane as it's currently written. There is an alternative compliance within the daylight plane provisions, and that's what we're planning on pursuing with this as our reasoning behind that. But it's definitely something I think we feel could be looked at again and reconsidered. On the right-hand side of this figure, you'll see this is the City View 2 project as it's currently designed. So you can see that there is a step back on the building. On the left-hand side, figure A is an example of an R3 development as the property is currently zoned of what's allowed to be built on that site. The orange line, diagonal line, cutting through that is how the daylight plane is currently written.
Mhm.
You start 15 feet up from grade and you go up at an angle of 3 to 5. And you can see right there that under an R3 development, what can be built there right now actually falls within that daylight plane.
So it could not be built in an R4.
Mhm. So in transposing those lines, the orange being the code as of today, and then the dashed one above that as really the true impact of what an R3 development could have on it, you can see that on the right-hand side under the City View project, by creating that step back of about 8 feet, we can build a 4-story structure but have not a greater impact on our neighbors by doing that. So I think something to really look at is this item and how it's written. Under the current code, we would have had to create a step back of 20+ feet, and at that point, we're putting our nice high-quality space on the north side of the building instead of the south side, which is where we really want people to be and to use that open space and take advantage of it.
And I might add, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that step back, we lost 12 units as a result of that. or partially as a result of that?
It was more like six.
Yeah,
or eight years.
yeah,
Yeah.
6 months, yeah. This is a situation where we have an alley across the way, so we have an additional 20 feet of space to get us up and over that daylight plane.
Again, it's important that, you know, as Harold indicated, the amount of R4 lots that are primarily smaller infill lots, that you're gonna be stuck in this situation dealing with this daylight plane and never be able to achieve the type of density that the comp plan calls for in those areas.
Just a point of information, when we developed this, we tested several lots, and our focus was on lots of this size, or similar size. And our testing found that the buildings that existed there, for example, Oranzov Tower and the corner of Spinar, fit in the daylight plane. We tested the Mountain View mixed-use building up on Mountain View Drive with lot dimensions very similar, alley behind. As we tested, that building could have been 6 stories and still fit inside the plane. Here we have kind of a worst-case scenario than we tested for. In those cases, the buildings were able to be shoved further away without step backs from the residential. And this lot depth of 140 feet is almost like a worst-case scenario. And the fact that the alley wasn't
What's typical
available.
with the R4 that we have zoned right now?
And so we tested for that, and we found that the buildings that we tested met it and could have been taller. And so, I just wanted to point that out.
Our,
Okay.
our
That's-
problem on this one is if we would have shoved it forward, we would have put more shadow on the neighbor that was to the east. Is it to the east? It was kind of like we were trying to pull it all the way back to the alley in order to give their backyard patios sunlight through there and not be a shade for them. So you're kind of caught in this, you're being forced to build a wedding cake in the
Mhm.
middle of the lot. And it's a strong form generator, this daylight plane, that I don't think you necessarily intended to do.
And it's the balance of, you know, we can build a smaller footprint in the center of the site. We are limited to height of 45 feet, so we really can only go up 4 levels. And if we had the ability to go up higher, then we have to go into steel construction versus a wood construction, and then what's the impact and the cost and the reality of doing that?
And again, it always comes back to cost, and I think you'll find that if you want to have new residential development in this town, in the zoning areas that we can place it at this current time, that the daylight plane creates a situation where you can't build the density that you need to be both economically feasible and to meet those communities' needs for housing. So
Okay.
it really becomes a question of, is that daylight plane so important that it should be driving the rest of the dog?
And I think most of us get that. Want to continue, because I'm getting a little concerned here about time.
Time.
Yeah.
This is just an example of the east property line of the building. You can see that when you do have a property-to-property condition without the alley in between, it really starts to impact it. So on the left-hand side is the R3, and on the right-hand side is the proposed City View 2 project, which actually has a lesser impact on the neighboring sites in the daylight plane.
We want to go back to you for a bit?
Yep.
All right. Next one.
Please.
I'm working on 2 screens, one of which I can't see. That's my complication.
So I think to respect your time and to wrap it up, I put together a list of recommendations. It may not fit your community, but it's just some ideas I had. Again, I'm not sure why you can't go out and rezone certain areas.
And that is supposed to be the process in which we're supposed to be headed.
Again, I think if for Country Lane, if that process had happened, they'd probably be under construction because, the timing was right, but whereas the delay just caused further delays. I didn't see in your purpose section that you ought to create a code that's clear and easy to understand, and sometimes that helps. You might consider a form-based code for certain areas or certain zones. I helped pass the first one in Idaho, and I think I must have done a really good sell job or something, but, you know, form-based codes are gaining momentum. I think there's a couple of really good advantages to them. They're graphical, so they're easy to understand. The other really good thing about them is they start knitting together the streetscape with the buildings. And I think for the most part, word-based zoning codes, traditional zoning codes, do miss that opportunity to integrate the streetscape.
So explain to me the form-based code.
Form-based codes talk about the form of the building. They almost don't care about what's inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
But they regulate, instead of talking about setbacks, you have to build the building up to a build-to line. They talk about the form of the building, the shape of the building, more than FARs and incentives and things like that. They certainly limit heights, and they talk about modulation and things like that. They cover all the basics, but it's just a different approach.
I'm still slightly confused, but it'd be nice to
I can give you
send an example.
I'd be happy to do
Yeah,
that.
because it.
Jennifer,
Dick?
what towns have adopted this form-based? Major-sized towns like that.
It's been a lot of work down in Florida, across some communities in Central and Midwest. It hasn't gained a lot of traction. California has quite a few areas that have adopted. It's also called their SMART code. Idaho has one. Washington has a few. So I could generate some more information for you.
Generate some more
That'd be
information,
great.
send it to
Absolutely.
us. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. So again, the thing that excites me the most is the streetscape aspect of integration with that.
And be honest with you, that was the intent all along. I mean, that was the constant mantra, was streetscape, open space, you know, the daylight, everything comes into that.
Well, typically you have your street standards off in public works.
Right.
You know, and there isn't that marriage that easy. So
Yeah.
just some quick information about it, and I can send this all to you.
Mhm.
In terms of regulatory, we've already talked about increasing the base FAR, reduce the incentives. I call them disincentives, but you know, whatever. Step back, sun shading, base heights. Again, I think that's really important to match the International Building Code, and actually to start looking at adopting local amendments that fit your community, that make wood frame construction a little more viable. Again, flexibility in solutions, and the alternative equivalent compliance. I think that's a lot of communities look at land use approvals separate from the building permit process, and you get that early. And when you have to submit 30% complete plans, that's a big investment in terms of design work. And then if something changes, you almost have to go back to square one. So that's something you might want to look at. And I think there was some talk about some tax abatement programs. Washington has a multifamily tax exemption program, so you get property tax exemption for 8 years if you do no affordable housing. If you do affordable housing, then include affordable housing, you get 12-year property tax
So just with
exemption.
strict multi-residential development, you get some kind of tax abatement?
Correct.
So a lot of how many of your projects that you built within the last 10 years have had some kind of tax abatement?
I think zero. I mean, we have not pursued an affordable
Okay, 'cause
housing
Yeah.
And so Seattle has a very, kind of one that was very well received by developers but we have not built a project in Seattle.
Seattle has other challenges in terms of building in it and owning and operating within the city limits, so.
Okay.
And a lot of communities have that tiered system. You get 8 years with no affordable housing and 12 with. So, and again, I think when you're talking about reducing costs, it's infrastructure. If you find ways to build roads that they don't have to build, then it helps. Everything helps. So, some different ideas in terms of achieving that.
Yeah, like on Country Lane, we have an understanding, there's like 48-inch storm line sewer that's out there that's basically probably gonna need replacing. We don't know it
Yeah.
is, but we've been warned by some of the civil engineers that, well, that's a big cost, and it's, right down the street right now.
Port
On the other
Authority.
hand, it's less expensive for you to do it than for us to do it, so.
Port authorities are great at putting together financing deals to build business parks,
Still no
extend,
money.
Build the roads
No,
and
no, I
all the
just-
infrastructure, and then development comes in.
Other people.
So that's all I got. Really appreciate the time.
Well, and quickly, if I can piggyback, maybe Tim and Michelle would have something. I just wanted to say thank you to Tom and Jared and Erica, because we talked yesterday about how, what we didn't want to do is come here and complain. There's nothing worse than people coming and beating the dead horse, because I know we've been here several times and talking about it. We want to try and come with recommendations, and now that we've been able to go through the process on some of these projects, we're seeing the realities of what it means. And real quickly, just to end, I'm going to pull up a project that we worked on for Cookland Housing Authority. If I can get it on the screen. There we go. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with this, this is an affordable housing project with Cookland Housing Authority. It initially started as a one-phase development, and it is now a two-phase development. I'm not able to maneuver it. What I wanted to say is there are some items like solar panels that have been added. That's something that could be considered as bonus, how can we make that work for our communities? How can that work to our benefit? There were an awful lot of projections that needed to happen on this project. They are not typical for the work that we've done with Cookland Housing Authority in the past. And we are waiting to get the bids on this. There's gonna go out next week, and I'm very interested to see the realities of what's gonna happen on this project, because this is totally new from what we've done before, and there's a lot more going on with these buildings than they may have previously. That being said, I'm very proud of the work that we've done with Cookland Housing Authority, given the budgets and the simplicity and what we've been able to give back to our communities. So similarly, whether it's an affordable housing project or not, it's that bottom line that is driving what's going to happen. And I am not convinced that this one's going to survive. My hope is it will. Another thing that maybe needs to be considered is we have, on the affordable housing side, we have tax credit applications. So this is an example of a tax credit driven project. Well, they have a 6-star requirement. You have a requirement for percentage of windows. Those two seem to be in contradiction to each other. I love the windows. As an architect, I'm thrilled to see that. I'd love to have more. However, I have a client who also has to balance the other side.
Yeah.
So that's one example of some of the things that we're starting to see come to light. And, we're happy to offer.
Do you have an estimated, do you have a clue of what your square footage cost is gonna be for this?
No, and I would have to get that from Cookland, and be able to release that. That being said, though, it's a large development. They are proceeding with only phase 1 at this time. And again, the truth is gonna come out here in the next month once we actually get some bids. But there are things that are in conflict to
No.
monitor because
Yeah.
it's a study.
Thank
That being said, there are a lot of communities that have a design review component, and that happens very quickly in the design process. So right at the get-go, you would have a concept, maybe not even this developed, and you would go to that design review committee, and you get a yay or a nay. And once you get the concept approved, you can run with construction documents, knowing that you can't deviate in any great nature. There's certain things that are going to deviate. But what it does is it gives these folks the reassurance that they're not gonna pay for, 50% drawings and get to a point where they can't proceed with the project.
This is a very interesting project because it's the first of its type to go through the new Title 21. This is what would be called in the old days a site condo. So this, although this is apartment housing that will be operated, owned, and maintained by Cookland Housing Authority, it is multiple structures on a single tract of land. So on that basis, it is the first one of its nature to go through a complete review now. It has gone to the Urban Design Commission and been approved, and now we're trying to work out some of the other details. The direction from the client for this project was to not design anything or do anything that would require a variance. So to save time and make sure there wasn't that exposure, it was to make sure that we didn't do anything that was out of direct alignment with what the new code called for. And it has been a challenge, and the resulting project, about half of the project is funded, but what Spark Design has clearly indicated that, as you are fighting for a 6-star qualification in Alaska housing requirements and federal monies, as you're doing this for affordable housing. So our subsidized housing leader in the community is challenged because they have to meet all those requirements or they don't get that money. So the only way to do that is to meet some certain requirements that those entities have. And sometimes they're in conflict with the code.
Yeah.
So every time you do add a job, every time you make the windows a mandatory 15% on a side versus 10 or 12%, they have solar panels on the upright planes of the building that are facing south. There is prescriptive landscaping that has to go along the foundation of the building that has a certain number of specified bushes and
Yeah.
trees. That's not going to lead to the performance of those panels. Plus, they're putting additional insulation board 2 feet under that planting bed to create a better thermal package and envelope for the building so it performs to meet the calculated rate in order to qualify for their money that they have to prove out. Because this just isn't go into it, we think it's gonna work. They come back and it's audited and tested. And if they don't meet, then they get hit pretty hard. So in doing that, now we've got plants where this other insulation board needs to go. The only way out of that is to go with an alternative design, whether it's with the building or that kind of approach. And as was said earlier, by the time you get to 35% design, plus, which is our requirement to be able to go for that alternative design, then all of a sudden you're deep into the project. You've spent a ton of money, you've spent a ton of time. If you have to change direction at that time or you're denied, now all of a sudden your timing is in jeopardy, added costs occur.
No, I
So
think,
it's tough.
I think I'm nodding my head because I've gone through the process for 6 years, but most of you are, I think, you have questions because are you understanding, there was a lot of concern about having the 2 codes going simultaneously for an extra year, but this was just the data that we were looking for that we didn't get last year. And I think it's important for these conversations, and I think it's important for you because I'm leaving to understand what's going on because we're only going to be able to make so many changes this year. We're just going to do the lowest hanging fruit. So.
Well, I did want to say one more thing just before I know we run out of time, and this is just to say that in my opinion, I've been in other locations and done development. I was a planning director in Gig Harbor. And I've been here since 1981. The planning department at this time is 30% of what it was in 1981, 82. You can talk about whether the workload's the same or anything else, but we are understaffed in my opinion. And the drag on the planning department in order to perform is just an unacceptable level. and that is hurting not just them, who are, I'm gonna say it, suffering from burnout. I would be if I were in your position. And it's making it more difficult for the rest of us to operate because there's not enough people to get the work done that needs to be done. Now, whether you do that with contractors or something else,
Right.
that's
And-
fine, but there's a number there. There's
Yeah.
a budget that has to.
And I
go
think
over.
we understand that, we also understand that we're antiquated, we need to be digital. I mean, there's all sorts of,
Sure.
and that's why I'm not as anxious as others to go right to tax abatement, because I think we have to clean up code and clean up our process first, and then look at some of the other incentives, but.
I gotta say, Tim kind of stole my thunder there, because I think that, we've been the benefactor of a number of conversations, in specific, project-based conversations with Tom and with Erica and with Jerry. We've gotten, as a large builder, we've gotten what I consider a goodly amount of their time, and yet, it's taken us this long. So
Yeah.
I can imagine what that's like for other folks who don't have the capability, the financial wherewithal, and the desire to build here. We have a desire to build here. We have a desire to be in the neighborhood. We, as I said, have 30-plus acres of land that we can and want to at some point develop. It has to make sense, and so, you've probably heard this, and Dick asked me, what are you doing with Country Lane? Are you not gonna do the project? Well, no, it's not that we're not doing the project, but we're not moving ahead like we would have before. We're not putting our foot on the gas pedal. We're not burning out Spark and Dow to have them go the midnight hours and do all this work for us, when in fact, it's still gonna take us, we're years away at this point, unfortunately. And I think somebody said this before, if we would have been farther along in the process, in other words, if we didn't go through some of the delays that we did and the code was in a different place, and if we were in the midst of breaking ground and developing,
You would go.
we would have gone, we would have finished. I mean, despite what's happened with oil, despite, what's happening with the military, we would have pressed forward and we would have finished. At this point, that's why we're put those on hold. We're looking at City View 2 as our test property, if you will, to see how long it takes for us to do a relatively small, just in our experience, it's not small for other folks, but in our experience, a relatively small project. How long is it really gonna take for us to get that brought out of the ground?
And what are the costs?
And what the costs
Yeah.
are gonna
Because
be.
there's always these few unknowns in there, the costs that we don't know, and we can't put a number on that right now.
Mhm.
It
And
won't be
Jennifer,
till we-
speaking from the citizens' viewpoint, I know the opposition that Leitner's run into in South Addition, I believe is directly related to understaffing in the planning office. That land use plan map hasn't been shown in daylight for years. I think Tom's been busy doing other things for some reason. And I think that the public is gonna be a lot more receptive to changing its amenities like sunlight if we have some hard public involvement in this process.
So,
Yes.
if I could, yeah, we, as I said, are committed to moving forward. One of the things that you've heard here is cost. I mean, it'll keep coming up, and cost is inevitable. I mean, we're gonna have to spend money in order to develop, but if we can address the additional costs that are causing us to tack on to that project and making it more expensive, then it makes it more palatable for us and for other developers. To that end, we've investigated different ways for us to mitigate that, and you talked about incentives. While Widener hasn't gotten behind any of those efforts, we know that there's a number of them being spoken about right now at the state level. We would certainly welcome that. That would help mitigate costs. But we're also doing things like, we're looking at modular building, and it's been done before here a number of years ago, but we don't see anybody building of scale modular, so that might be an option for us if we can make those numbers
Would you
work.
be doing your modulars here or be shipping them up?
We would look at all
Yeah.
avenues. I mean, it makes sense. Anything that we can do in order to still provide quality building that meets the needs here, and the needs are large. I mean, you need the building. They need to be here. Not only multifamily. I mean, there needs to be single family and townhome, all the wide gamut. We just do multifamily. The density issue is something that's real. I think that's being addressed at this point. But if modular works, then we would encourage the assembly to help us get that through planning and permit, and make sure that that's something that is allowable and appreciated and welcomed. And so, if that can be good for us and good for other developers, then we expect effort to look into that and not have roadblocks to that sort of construction.
And to piggyback on that too, oftentimes when you hear modular construction, you think of the man camps up on the North Slope, very rigid boxes. And modular construction would be clad with everything, same materials that you see around town now. So it would fit in with the aesthetics.
Actually,
and-
yeah, I mean, I've seen some unbelievable
Unbelievable.
single-family
Yeah.
home modular construction. I mean, it's, Canadians are doing a lot of it.
It's,
Um,
part of it is to attack that, both the cost and that time factor. If we can have somebody else where they can pump it out in half the time and have it immediately come out on site during the winter months or the summer months when you can build, we can get it in the ground and be done and not have to do the extra cost of the winterized things.
So does anybody have any questions?
Well, my question for you is, or maybe for Jerry, is, where are we at as far as, what have we identified, the first areas that we're going to address?
We have an ordinance
That's one on the 14th.
right.
Right.
So that was our first go-around.
Okay.
And that will, as I can't remember what the public hearing date is on that.
Mhm.
And I call it our lowest hanging fruit ordinance.
That one, forgive me, because I haven't seen it yet, but does that one deal with the floor area ratio? Does it deal with the?
No, this is more lower hanging fruit than that.
It's the storage, right, is one of them?
Storage is one of the items.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. First of all, I asked at the beginning if we could publish this on the website, and you said yes. Are you still comfortable with that?
I don't think that'll be a big issue, but let me talk with the team and we'll get back with you today.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Because of that, I think that's.
Because I actually don't think that's gonna be a huge issue, but
Yeah.
some of that's not our work product.
You'll at least be able to give it to us, right, Greg? Because
That's right.
I didn't take copious notes because
Yeah.
I thought I was getting
No,
that.
yeah, and you are gonna send it to us digitally, but I just for conversation, community conversation.
Well, we could, if you wanted, if you agree, Greg, we could put it up there as, what happened, what was presented today.
Yeah.
And I think, just so you know, my concern, and again, I'll talk with the team. Our
Right.
concern really is not for the things that we're advocating
Right.
for. It's that we've included some other projects that aren't ours in terms of just for illustrative purposes. So let us talk a little bit about that. as to whether or
And
not
that's fine, it's just,
okay.
I think it would be a nice, because it is a community talking point.
Sure.
It is, as I say, I get a little scared because everybody's going towards tax abatement, and I feel we need to deal with the code and our process first,
Mhm.
and then look and see where you go from there. So, I think it'd be helpful
Okay.
if that's the case.
Jennifer, your item's coming in front of the assembly on the 14th for introduction. Public hearings requested the 28th.
Okay, yeah.
So then the next round of proposed Title 21 changes, like the FAR boost, a few other things that we've identified. Jerry, Erica, where are you in getting something put together?
Well, we haven't, as a.
Have you introduced the thing that we presented at the last meeting? Is that what's up on the 14th?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you asked us to make some changes to that, which we're still.
Oh, no,
working on,
this is,
so-
I'm pretty
Is
sure.
did this come from us?
Yeah, it came from you.
Okay, then I don't think it includes, some.
It does, it isn't our, because I just looked at it briefly and I
Okay.
thought it doesn't include FAR at all.
Okay.
But it was the first draft of our changes to code.
Okay, so I think the multifamily work that we talked about last week
Right.
should be going to be in June.
Okay, so,
And if you want us to continue working on some of these issues, we can do that, that'll push it maybe to July.
well, see, okay, my intention, and the committee can jump in here whenever, we don't need to have a catch-all bill going. My intention was, as we found things we needed fixing, we introduce them and we take care of them.
Amen.
So, and really, some of this stuff, I'm not even sure if we need to go.
We just need to know again, Jennifer, you had indicated earlier that you wanted them all to go back to the planning commission, so if that's.
Yeah, I know, and I did, and I'm now kind of rethinking this out loud. I had started with the intention that we have a process where it goes from us to the planning commission. Well, the other thing was happening is the planning commission was working on theirs too, and I didn't want, to have this big, primeval shift between the two, but I had started this out with a process that we'd work in a committee, go to planning and zoning, and then go to the assembly. Some of this stuff, like the stuff that I feel we've dealt with already, really, as I say, is very low-hanging fruit and probably could be, I think, should be expedited. So what are people's thoughts on this?
I agree. I mean, I wanna, the stuff that we talked about last time, the storage and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things we're in the construction season now. I mean, we're there. We need to get moving. So if we identify it, I wanna expedite it. I wanna get it through.
Jennifer, I'd like to see this stuff move forward as fast as we can.
So-
Little niblets along the way rather than one.
Right,
massive
well, I
big
don't
thing.
want one
I
big.
just wanna get these done in little bites and get them processed.
But the process I had come up with was here, planning and zoning, assembly. What I'm asking, are you comfortable skipping planning and zoning?
We've got the ability to do that, in assembly.
I think that becomes, I think that becomes
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
that
I'm just-
becomes
I'm
a
just
public
asking.
process
What we
problem.
could ask them is to hold a special meeting.
Okay.
I think we should do that.
But anyway, so back to, let's move forward with that one. And then we'll start a brand new one discussing FAR. Okay? And anything else that you have garnered from this conversation and with this process that you've gone through with this and other groups that you want to bring to the table to us. Now, I want, what I'm looking for is every month a Title 21 ordinance going through.
We've got about 8 or 9 ordinances that are at various points. Some are at the assembly, some are ready to be introduced, some are scheduled at P&Z, and some are still being worked at, at the department level.
Could we
So-
get in
But there is an element of a resources factor.
Yeah, I know, and I've been trying to be, conscious of that. But, again, I don't want also to hold and wait for the perfect ordinance either.
It's not even that.
Yeah.
The one on the 14th hasn't gone to P&Z, right? The one we're introducing.
If it's been introduced by the department, then it has gone to P&Z.
So the one on the 14th hasn't or hasn't?
Has gone.
If we put it
It
into
was
case,
your-
then yes, then it has gone.
Roger that.
And then there was also discussion whether it's by the department or by Title 21 committee, and I don't give a rip what we call it.
Right.
But just as long as we get going. So, why don't we schedule a meeting, this month, and let's just get a understanding where we are with what's on your desk, and, what ordinances are ready to go, what we need to do, what we do. And if we pull out our calendars, let's see.
What days are our meetings this month? Is it 14th, 21, and 28?
14th, 21st, and 28th.
The 21st is just to certify the election. That's everything we do on the 21st.
Does the Budget Finance Committee still meet at noon on Thursday?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the 16th.
Okay.
Yeah, they meet-
What does everybody's
12 to 1.
21st look like?
Right now, mine's fine.
The 21st? Mine's empty.
Okay, would
I'm
that work for you
optimistic.
folks, same time, 11:30?
We'll make it work.
Okay, so 11:30 on the 21st.
2 hours?
Yes, just to be safe, let's do 2 hours. Does anybody have any closing comments or interest?
I want to thank you, Greg, and your team. For coming
Yes.
out. Appreciate it.
And again, I'll reiterate that we're very glad that we had the opportunity to participate. We're here as partner. We're going to continue to be here for a long time. And so, to the degree that we can get this right and make it easier to develop, we'll do our part there. So, continue to ask us questions if you need. We'll be here and to answer this for you.
And back to the material you're gonna be supplying, if that could be part of the, if we are allowed to put it on the web, that could be there too, it'd be quite useful.
Okay.
The idea of going to that type of code.
You talking about form-based?
Form-based
Form-based.
just makes me cringe, but then I wouldn't be the one around to do it.
Another 12 years.
Right.
Well, but, I mean,
But-
I'll
but-
remind the chair, I mean, when we sat here with Cook Inlet a few months ago
Right.
in January, Jerry, actually, his comment was about, I mean, and he didn't use the words, but he said
Yeah.
we have to be sensitive, and I think there was a quote, sensitive to the form of the buildings on the particular
Right.
parcels of land. So, I mean, I think it marries some of the intent of what Harold's talking about.
Can I follow up on that? So, you know, we're talking about being sensitive to what's around, but we also heard that the daylight plane doesn't work. So how are we gonna be sensitive to protecting existing neighborhoods? Do you guys have any ideas of the things that we should look at or what you've seen in other communities? If you're saying that the daylight plane is not the way to go, what, are there places we should be looking at for new ideas that can be, you know, sensitive to surrounding areas? Because, you know, that was our idea and it's not working, well, what's the next thing to look at?
Well, I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think it's a slippery slope when you are trying to protect public views or views, private views, and I almost see private, the sunlight thing is almost in that same category. It's difficult, in my opinion, and this is just my perspective, if you want to protect your views or your sunlight, you ought to buy it. Rights of way exist for view corridors and to open up development. So, I think it's just, I don't know your community, I don't know what you're trying, whether that is so important that you have to regulate it.
Well, one thing that's brought up with the sunlight is that, so you're protecting one border and you're exposing another border, so.
It's challenging, but it goes back to the Euclidean it's Euclidean zoning, that was the basic premise of Euclidean zoning, air, light, and open space. And, and it's a balancing, but I saw loud and clear today with respect to the by right allowances in the R3 and the R4, and how that light plane impacts those areas that we need to look at again.
From my perspective, from a lay perspective, and I'm not an engineer either, but it seems to me that there are certain areas that we need to be out there saying this makes sense for us to do this kind of development at, right? And it doesn't make sense in all areas of this city or any city. And so, in order to do dense, mixed-use, multifamily, those sorts of projects need to be located close to a number of different factors, right? It needs to be close to where people work at. It needs to be close to where they can go to their, right, they can get their,
connectivity.
they can go to the marketplace. I mean, so,
Yeah.
to me, you would want to look for districts or areas where it makes sense and designate that that's kind of the intent, right? And I go back to what I said before. I felt, standing in front of that community council, and again, that's our job, that's what the code says, we'll do it. But I felt that we were taking the brunt of the responsibility that rightly belongs with the muni, in my opinion, to go out and say, hey, this is what we want, and you take the arrows. Don't make me hold my shield up and have to take the arrows. We'll partner with the city, but I felt like we were the ones that were getting the brunt of something that the city wants. And so, if it's not in that district or that corridor, find one that it is, whether it's Spenard, wherever you want to do that at. And you be the leaders and you be out in front, as opposed to making us do that.
And I have to say, one of my checkoffs I was hoping in my last year is the land use map.
We are gonna take a lot of that brunt, Greg, in the land use plan map in a lot of different areas, so.
Because we have conflicts all over the city where, it's just antiquated and it's, and I would hope that we do the.
So it'll be rolled out in your tenure.
Whenever I go to a new city, the Dean's buying some new land somewhere, first thing I pull up is the land use map.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense in
Yeah.
Anchorage. It's
No,
like,
it-
where's
it's-
the R4?
It's, as I say, it's antiquated, it's.
And I'd start small, concentrate, and grow from there, because retail works when it's packed in. So.
Yeah, and back to the view shed, I'm always have a smile on my face because we have our civic center that has that beautiful deck that looks towards the mountains. And I think of that poor person, I think it's actually, maybe it's a widow who's died or something, but she owns a lot that is between the mountains and that beautiful public facility. And do you think they're gonna be able to build anything on that lot? But it's always different for the public than it is for the private.
There's something I would add too, is that when you're gonna regulate it, look at your community and see if what you're regulating, what you're trying to control is really a problem. Do
Yeah.
we really have a problem in Anchorage of buildings shadowing all of their neighbors? Or are we solving something that, I mean, to me, when I look at this coming from an area that's much more dense, I think there's sunlight everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, when the sun comes out, that you do have open space. You've got open space all over the place, particularly with the wetlands and the stuff that you've got intermixed within your city. And so are we trying to get light, air, and sunlight into, you don't have a canyon of a city that you need light, air, and those types of things. It's open here.
Well, we're a young city, and our comprehensive plan is old now, and we were trying to fix problems that were coming up in the 80s. So it's, you know, and then we built a code around a comprehensive plan that was already antiquated. So we're, you know, there's a lot of things going on here, but it's all part of being a young city, and I think we're very lucky that Mr. Widener got some of his start with Alaska Airlines, and Alaska, we wouldn't be so fortunate to have you here, and I appreciate, you know, your times, and it is very helpful.
Thank you.
And I, you know, let's stay in touch and see if we can move
So,
this.
Madam Chair, based on your most recent comment about the comp plan being outdated, it is past its midterm review. And is there a work program scheduled, Jerry or Eric, for the Assembly Committee?
It's not on the current work program.
As
There are
to
other
when
things in
that's
front
gonna be
of it.
targeted?
That is
Or will that be a
kind of one thing.
32-year-old?
Well, that's kind of one of the things that I'm hoping isn't in my tenure. Let me get one foot out the door.
Sure, but-
But it should be, it really, it does need to be, it is antiquated.
What is that?
2020.
Comp plan.
2020.
Yeah. But it's something for some of you,
Bill?
others to be.
Cheryl, I didn't say it was antiquated, I said it was out of date.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay. Anyways, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Good conversation.
Yes.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks very much.
Oh, no, you got
It's up to you, I'm just forewarning you.
We'll do it.